a black hole, the most destructive object mankind has ever known. We as a civilization have yet to get close enough to even begin to understand the properties of such a phenomenal entity. One would best dare not test its seemingly inscrutable abyss, yet today we find ourselves hurtling towards the event horizon. What happens if someone were cast into it? And if they managed to survive, how would they get back out? No Man's Sky hasn't always been the great game that we have come to know and love today. In fact, when it launched, most were fully ready to abandon it completely based on the atrocious state that it was in. In this case, however, it wasn't the normal response from an audience that usually comes with a poorly optimized launch. This was due to the fact that leading up to the game's release, players felt as though they were sold on a promise of a much more grand experience than the game had to offer by the time it actually reached players' hands. Sort of felt like, how come the gaming industry continues to do this? Why are they being dishonest with us? Is this what we should expect from developers at this point, and expect this for more and more games as they come out? You see, this was sort of around the time when we were starting to see gaming companies start to implement some more rather unsavory practices into their games. So it felt like No Man's Sky was just going to be yet another attempt at fooling players into buying something that wasn't necessarily going to meet their expectations. And with that, the game would begin to crash following the backlash it would receive once the curtains were pulled back for its unveiling. If you haven't kept up with the game prior to, or maybe this is your first time taking an interest in learning about what happened with this game's launch, then buckle up, because we're fixing to go back in time and figure out what happened with the crash of this game. In 2013, No Man's Sky was revealed for the first time at the VGX Awards, showing off an ambitious universe of infinite planets, seamless space travel, and endless possibilities. The game, developed by Hello Games, a small team led by Sean Murray, instantly caught the gaming world's attention. At E3, if you can believe that, 2014, the hype exploded when Sony featured No Man's Sky on their main stage. The procedurally generated worlds, diverse alien creatures, a promise of an infinite shared universe with unique planets for every player created a massive expectation. The media and players alike were captivated by the vision of boundless sci-fi adventure. This was a game where no two people would have the same experience. Sean Murray became the face of the game while doing multiple high-profile interviews with Sony, IGN, even appearing on The Late Show with Stephen Colbert. Features were teased, including multiplayer, deep space battles, faction systems, and worlds rich with life and discovery. Felt like one could compare this to games like Elite Dangerous and Minecraft, but with the focus on seamless exploration and mystery. Sony pushed the marketing heavily, making No Man's Sky feel like a AAA title despite being made by a small indie studio. With each trailer and interview, expectations grew. Players imagined a universe filled with thrilling discoveries, cooperative multiplayer, and emergent gameplay. It wasn't just a game, it was presented as a revolutionary new experience. Sean Murray was really hyping this game up. Now we can fast forward a bit closer to the expected launch, where we can start to see some of the cracks in the hull of this ship. Originally set for June 2016, No Man's Sky was suddenly delayed to August. Now, delays aren't always the worst thing that can happen during a game's development. Hell, oftentimes people are usually okay if it means the game is going to come out for the better. But in this case, the delay led to intense backlash, including death threats directed at Sean Murray and the rest of the staff. The delay, while necessary for development, only heightened pressure on the studio to deliver something groundbreaking. People were so excited for this game to come out, someone found and bought a copy of the game for a whopping $1,300 about 2 weeks early. $1,300. What the actual f? August 9th, 2016, launch day arrives. When players finally got their hands on No Man's Sky, they quickly realized something was off. While the game did offer a massive procedurally generated universe, many of the key features that had been teased often were missing or severely underdeveloped. Well, what was missing? For starters, the multiplayer didn't even exist. Players had been led to believe that they could explore together with their homies, but there was no other way to actually meet any of the other players. Those factions and glorious large-scale space battles were nowhere to be found. The procedural generation was repetitive, economy and trade systems were shallow, no ringed planets, no sandworms, no true environmental diversity. Just like most of the planets you would land on, this game was barren. This of course caused a cosmic horror of disappointment to appear at the helm of this tiny team of developers that tried to fly on by unscathed. Metaphorically speaking, they encroached the event horizon of a black hole. Steam, Reddit, and other social media platforms were flooded with complaints calling the game boring, empty, and misleading. Hello Games had to undergo harsh media scrutiny, with major gaming outlets calling No Man's Sky one of the most overhyped launches in history. Many of the publishing platforms like Steam, PlayStation, and Amazon saw an unusually high number of refund requests, some granting refunds even outside of their normal policies. And in response to this, Hello Games had gone radio silent. Instead of addressing concerns and fueling rumors that the game was abandoned, they had now become No Man's Lie. What was once a game that promised the stars had seemingly collapsed into a black hole of broken expectations. This brings us to a point where one could imagine it should be absolutely over for this gaming company. I think we can all agree that when a development team pulls a stunt like this pretty much means they pretty much get what they deserve. Even today, it's still common sentiment that we can't allow companies to even feel comfortable with the idea that they can just misinform their paying customers and not expect to be fully consumed by their own faults. And the same would apply to Hello Games about a decade ago. I'm old, bruh. But there's a belief that I have been getting to notice that might be shared by a lot more people in the gaming community than I may have originally realized. Perhaps it's the rumination of the silent majority that always remains unconsidered amidst certain controversies. I'd like to make the claim that, at first it might seem like gamers love to tear a game apart when it launches in a broken state, but the truth is, most people don't actually want their games to fail. Beneath the frustration and backlash, there's deeper hope that these games will rise above their rough launches and become something greater. Even when the game stumbles out of the gate, players are still rooting for it to make a comeback when it starts to make a turn for the better. I mean, I feel like this idea could explain why people get so serious about it in the first place. Otherwise, why would anybody care to make such a fuss about something that has portrayed them in some way? We all have our own deep and personal connection to gaming, and for most of the people watching this video, it's not just a video game to us. So like, you remember that scene in Interstellar where Matthew McConaughey got sucked into the gargantua black hole and he's using love to try to communicate with Murphy in the past? I like to pretend that that's us, except we're using those Donkey Kong, like Jungle Beat bongos that you gotta plug into your GameCube to communicate with the devs, which is like way more convoluted than Morse code somehow. And look, we grew up as the guinea pigs of this industry. Plenty of ideas and approaches succeed or fail, with us being the litmus test for what works and what doesn't. We subconsciously know the effort of what goes into bringing a game from the drawing board to the storefront. We can see the intentions behind mechanics and why a developer decided to go one way versus the other. We can feel the spirit of what was meant to be experienced by the player, because most devs are likely gamers themselves, and you'd imagine they'd at least try to make a game they want to play as well. Unless of course they're only in it for the money. With that being said, I believe that's also why the game was able to make a comeback at all. If players didn't want to see the success of the game, it would still be lost in the void. With what Sean Murray promised the game could be, I think that dream is what kept people invested. We were promised a game that didn't necessarily check every single box possible, but for what we wanted from it, those things seemed to be just enough for a particular itch we may want to scratch on occasion. And that was all people would need in order to stick around and see what the game would have to offer in the future. It was the notion from the team that they had a profound understanding of what the audience would want. Which brings us to the gravity shift from Hello Games. After everything that happened, eventually the studio would come out with a series of updates that defied the laws of physics. Now for this next part, I got a few points here that I'll go over that cover some of the really cool stuff that was brought into the game. I won't be focusing much on the story here though. It just wasn't that interesting, to be honest, but it is serviceable enough if you just want to go through what could be considered like a tutorial for the game. Starting with the first update, we got Foundation. This came out in November of 2016. This was the first major update after launch. One small step for Hello Games, one huge step for gamers. Okay, That was pretty much a lie, but they had to start somewhere. Base building was sort of introduced, letting players create and customize planetary outposts. You could now farm and cultivate plant life if you're into that kind of thing. Players could now deploy certain equipment that does things like mineral mining, or a device that lets you leave cute little messages for when other people find your planet. Survival mode and creative mode was added, providing different gameplay experiences if you wanted something other than the intended way to play. And freighters became available, allowing players to own massive cargo ships. Shortly after that, we got the Pathfinder update. This introduced exocrafts, making planetary exploration faster and easier. Take that with a grain of salt, because these things felt like the Volkswagen Golf and like Need for Speed Most Wanted. They were insanely slow. You can now own multiple ships. Just found out that wasn't a thing to begin with, which also introduced starship specializations. Bases that you created were now available to be shared online, which made it easier for others to see those little messages you would leave with one of those devices from earlier. Atlas Rises then comes out with a focus on story and multiplayer. I remember when this story first came out because it served as one of the first big indicators that they were actually trying to create some semblance of goodwill. The story wasn't the most interesting thing, if I'm being honest, like I said before, but it definitely gave the game a good bit of structure if you weren't necessarily sure what to do for the first few hours. It also introduced portals, which allowed players to quickly travel between planets, and finally implemented the first form of multiplayer. These were presented as glitches where players could see each other as floating orbs, which in my opinion is a rather interesting way to distract from the fact that it wasn't a feature, it was probably a bug, and decided to say shit, they won't figure it out. They also overhauled the planetary biomes, economies, and missions for more variety. The Abyss update came out in October of 2018. This is where they overhauled the underwater environments, adding depth to ocean biomes. This update was so cool to me because I had always felt like the oceans on the planet weren't really all that great. You know, the part that usually takes up most of a planet was severely lacking. That doesn't make any sense. When this update came out, I would dip underwater and explore to see what they had in store for me, while in real life, I would try to hold my breath and try to see if I could stay alive the whole time. I was basically drowning in my own bed. Luckily, they also introduced submarines, or rather the Nautilin exocraft, for more efficient navigation. The Visions update then came out, offering more world variety. It added new planet types and more diverse biomes and exotic creatures. It also introduced archaeology, allowing players to dig up ancient bones and technologies. There's also rainbows. In August 2019, the Beyond update comes out. This was my favorite for me personally because, as you can see, I'm a huge fan of VR. It offered full VR support, so now I can see my fellow alien species in their full glory. It also expanded multiplayer, which brought the Nexus as well as Nexus missions, which was a new social hub where players could meet up and embark on missions together. It also reworked the alien interactions, improving NPC dialogues and lore. Then came along the Synthesis update. It added the ability to allow players to update their starship class. It added inventory slots, and you could even scrap starships for units and parts. The terrain manipulator was now overhauled, allowing flattering and restoring to give you some kind of control over the landscape around the base you wanted to build. You can even save custom drip. Not that the game even really has a lot of that, but the option was still there. Photo mode and creature riding was added to VR, so you could take photos of you riding it. Pause. So you can look back and remember the good old days. It also added the personal refiner, which means you were putting that back to work to get the resources you need. And on top of it all, they added multiple multi-tools, meaning you can have a different flavor of tool you'd want to get down with. The next update was the Living Ship update, which was organic starships. That's kind of funky. It introduced the, living ships, which were biomechanical vessels that were grown rather than built in like a manufacturing facility or something. That's kind of it. That's kind of all the update was. I'm sorry. Then came along the Exo Mech update. It introduced the Minotaur, a pilotable mech. Wait, what? Oh, they just had to know I was waiting on a mech suit, baby. Ugh. This update also improved upon the exocraft handling and terrain interaction, but honestly, who gives a there's a mech suit now. Then we have the Desolation update in July of 2020. You remember the game Dead Space? You know, the game where you run around pretending to avoid all the macabre and horribly mutated starship crew, but in reality, you're intentionally trying to make the protagonist meet his demise in every which way possible, just so you can see the gruesome animations every time his HP hits 0. Yeah, I knew you would like that, you little freak. I know what your YouTube history looks like. But yeah, they sort of did that there, so now it's like Dead Space, but in space this time. The Origins update dramatically improved planet diversity with new weather, terrain, and biomes. It enhanced clouds, lighting, and environmental effects. And colossal archive buildings where you could go and archive stuff. To be honest, I have never come across one of these, but it looks pretty cool, so there's that. But if you haven't noticed already, at this point, the game had started to become something truly spectacular. Everything I just went over was just about half of what they've added to this game. Most of the rest of it being visual updates, but if you're wondering why I didn't go over everything they had to offer, because fuck them, that's why. This game just exudes exploration and interesting experiences. These are some of the things that keep me coming back to this game time and time again. It's just so fascinating how every time I boot it up, I usually have something in mind that I want to get accomplished during this play session, but the way everything just works together in tandem, you just end up doing other things in order to get the first thing started to begin with. Most of the time you get so drawn into everything that you find out the game has much more to offer you, and you often forget about what you originally had planned. And this is just what I love the most about this game. You can just plan to play for like an hour or so before you go to bed, and when you look up at the time to see what time it is, it's about time to go clock in and go to work. So to bring this video to a close, I want to talk about something that this game helped me appreciate. While I was putting the script for this video together, there was a point where I got stuck, like really stuck. I'm still a little new to the YouTube space, so I had never experienced this feeling before. And I'm sure that some of you that have put out content for yourself have had this happen as well. I was just sitting there staring at the page, hoping the words would sort of write themselves. At first, I kept telling myself it's writer's block. I just gotta find some kind of remedy, or maybe, I don't know, I could just take a break and come back to it. Because when you put something out that truly comes from the heart, your labor starts to bear fruit. And I feel like somebody out there needs to hear that. Now, in one of the comments of our recent videos, I noticed that someone was being originally what I considered to be a negative Nancy. They were disagreeing with the idea that the video had gestured, and it really just seemed like they wanted what they believed to take precedence, which in reality isn't much different than what I was doing in the video. So I can actually dig that. I usually try to incline and understand where others are coming from when they differ from my opinion, so that's what I sought out to do in this case. Because what good is your belief if you aren't willing to have it tested? And if I'm being honest, he wasn't necessarily wrong. Not everybody has to be on board with accepting the failures of game devs. I just personally wish we could get to a space where gaming companies and their corresponding money managers can see the vision we all wish could come to life. And in order to do that, I believe you have to keep putting that idea out there front and center. Funnily enough, it was this clashing comment that inspired me to continue writing, because it helped me understand what happened with Hello Games and No Man's Sky. Now, in my case, it turns out it wasn't writer's block that originally kept me from writing. It was fear of an ambition not being able to be brought to life or accepted by others due to the faults of my own self. The goal of this channel is to bring back positivity into the gaming community, whether it's just silly gameplay clips or just more thought out messages like this one that resonate with the overall objective that certain developers are trying to reach. This concept was sort of challenged interpersonally with me with the existence of that comment. This revelation that I had helped me understand that you can't just spend time worrying about everything being perfect for everyone and just try to get better as time goes on. So instead of cowering under the pressure, the only way to achieve your goals is to get to work. Because they didn't give up on their dream. They didn't make excuses. They didn't buckle under the weight of expectations from the fans. They just got to work. That's it. Something in the gaming community that in this trying times is extremely rare. But in this peculiar case, considering how far gone the team at Hello Games was, they managed to do the impossible. Thanks again for watching another one of these thingy things, and if you made it this far, might as well leave us a like and subscribe. And if you want to share your experience with the game, feel free to leave a comment or join our Discord. See ya, Space Cowboy.